The ballroom smelled of bright lights and cold coffee. Reporters pressed into their rows, ties loosened, recorders raised, each one waiting for a sound bite sharp enough to spin into headlines. The UFC backdrop stretched high across the wall behind the table, its bold letters shimmering beneath the heat of stage lamps. At the center sat Dana White, his grin wide, his suit jacket hanging open like he owned the oxygen in the room. The press conference had rolled through the usual motions. Questions about ticket sales, rankings, who was headlining which card. Dana had fielded them all with his usual rhythm, cracking jokes, shrugging off tension, turning it into theater. But then he leaned forward, elbows planted on the desk, eyes searching the audience. He was looking for something juicier than pay-per-view numbers. "Chuck Norris?" he said suddenly, voice carrying over the hum of chatter. "Come on, guys, he wouldn't last a minute in the Octagon." The sentence didn't fall into silence. It detonated. Laughter broke from one corner of the room. A reporter in the front row barked a laugh so hard his pen fell from his hand. A cluster of younger journalists snickered into their phones, already typing, thumbs racing to upload the line before anyone else. Cameras pivoted at once, shutters clicking in rapid fire. Others in the room froze, caught off guard by the bluntness. Dana leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the reaction. "Look," he added, waving a hand, "I respect what he did in his time, but let's be real. He's an actor, not a fighter. That was Hollywood, not combat sports." His smile spread wider, almost rehearsed. "Symbol of the past, that's all." The words tasted like dismissal, and the reporters knew it. That was the point. It wasn't about truth, it was about theater, the kind of line that could fill headlines for days. Across the room, phones lifted higher. The glow of their screens dotted the dim seats like fireflies. Twitter feeds lit up within seconds, hashtags already forming. "Norris, your UFC." 1 minute. A producer in the back whispered into a headset, "We've got our clip." For a moment, the crowd was two things at once, hysterical and unsettled. The laughter carried, but beneath it, a current of tension twisted. Dana's tone had been too sharp, too direct, as if the jab wasn't just at a legend. It was at something sacred. The cameras cut to wide angles, hunting for reactions. Some reporters smirked, others kept their faces neutral. A woman in the third row typed frantically, her lips moving as she read Dana's words aloud to herself, making sure she got the phrasing exact. A young man near the aisle whispered to his neighbor, "Did he just say that?" Dana saw the ripple he'd created and leaned into it. "What's next?" he teased, tapping the microphone. "Are we supposed to put Bruce Lee in the rankings too?" He laughed, loud and alone, inviting others to follow. A few did. Others just watched, recording, saving their reaction for later. But under the lights, the dismissal rang too loud to ignore. It had gone from a joke to a declaration, the kind of sentence that couldn't be pulled back once it was in the air. And somewhere in the audience, unmoving in his chair, sat the man at the center of it all. The camera didn't catch him immediately. He wasn't in the spotlight. He hadn't come to speak. He was just there, sitting low among the rows, dressed simply, blending into the sea of faces. But word spread fast, quicker than the cameras could react. People began to nudge each other, craning necks, realizing who was in the room. Chuck Norris. Not at the table, not under the UFC banner, not with a microphone in front of him. Just a guest, sitting quietly among the press, arms folded, eyes fixed forward. For now, he said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence stretched toward him, drawn by its own gravity. Reporters angled their cameras in his direction, lenses hunting for his face in the dim. The laughter that Dana had triggered began to falter, one chuckle at a time, until what filled the room wasn't noise but expectation. And still, Chuck didn't move. His expression gave away nothing, no smirk, no scowl. Just the steady weight of a man who had heard worse, who didn't need to fight back with volume. But the calm itself felt dangerous, like a storm cloud that hadn't yet decided where to break. The press conference rolled on, or at least tried to. A few questions were lobbed from the back rows, but they landed flat, unanswered, the energy still locked on the remark and the silence that followed. Dinah answered another question about pay-per-view sales, but his earlier laugh had already grown teeth. The moment was bigger than the event. It spread through the room like smoke. This wasn't going to fade by the end of the press conference. The sentence had been too sharp, the cameras too fast, the audience too alert. Everyone in that ballroom knew. This clip wouldn't just be replayed. It would demand an answer, and everyone also knew exactly where that answer would have to come from. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, Bello. The laughter Dana had triggered began to splinter. At first it rolled freely, but then it broke into uneasy threads. Scattered chuckles, awkward coughs, the sound of people unsure if they'd gone too far. The ballroom air felt thin, sharpened by heat from the lights. Phones glowed like a constellation above the crowd as whispers passed row to row. He's here. It took the cameras a moment to find him. When one finally did, the lens cut past shoulders and heads and caught a man seated low in the third row. Denim jacket, quiet posture, eyes fixed forward. Chuck Norris. No entourage, no PR shield, no spotlight. He hadn't come to talk, hadn't come to be bait. He was just there. Yet the discovery traveled like static through the room. Faces turned, murmurs turned into murmured names. He didn't smile, he didn't scowl. He simply sat still, one hand resting on a folded program, the other loose on his knee. The stillness was sharper than anger, the calm of someone who had endured louder insults in smaller rooms. But here, under these lights, silence felt like a decision that carried weight. Donna noticed the attention shifting. "Guys," he said into the mic, forcing a laugh, "we're here to talk about fights that actually exist, okay?" His grin stayed wide, but the punchline didn't land. The focus was no longer his. From the corner of the hall, a small group of fans started a chant. "Chuck! Chuck!" It wasn't loud, but it rippled through the rows, the kind of sound security tried to suppress with a glance. The chant faded, then returned softer, more like a warning than support. A reporter with a thin tie stood and raised his recorder. "Chuck, is it true you're too old for the fight game now?" His tone carried more bait than curiosity. Heads turned toward the back, eyes hungry for a response. Chuck didn't move. His gaze stayed steady on the stage, fixed on Dana. If there was heat, it didn't show. What showed was appraisal, a cold measure. His silence bent the room tighter than words could. Another journalist tried. "Do you agree you wouldn't last a minute in the Octagon?" Her voice wavered, almost apologetic. Again, no response. Chuck's jaw eased, his shoulders low, as though silence itself was discipline. Dana filled the gap. "Look, he's a legend, nobody's saying otherwise," he said, palms open. "But it's a different game now. It's science. You don't bring a classic car to a drag race." He laughed too loudly, looking for support that didn't come. The crowd's attention shifted back to Chuck. A producer sent a mic runner down the aisle, headset pressed tight. The kid stopped at Chuck's row, leaned slightly forward. "Sir, would you like to respond?" His voice trembled. Chuck raised one hand, low and subtle. Not a wave, not refusal, just not yet. The gesture silenced the aisle more effectively than a word. The room grew thick with waiting. Someone sneezed at the back and drew glares. A stage light hummed audibly. Reporters fidgeted with pens, unable to mask their nerves. This was the place where men usually defended themselves, where they clawed back dignity with words. The refusal to do so made everyone lean forward, fabric creaking as bodies tilted toward the same point. Dana pushed harder. "Everybody loves him. But don't confuse movies with sport. The Octagon isn't nostalgia, it's math." He tapped the table for emphasis, missing the mic, the thud dull and unconvincing. The chant rose again. This time not from excitable fans, but from the middle rows where old writers sat. Men who knew the difference between theater and truth. Their low voices carried, "Chuck! Chuck!" Not loud, but steady. The sound of judgment. Finally, Chuck moved. He set the folded program on the empty chair beside him, pressed his thumb once against the paper, then stood. The shift was minimal, but it changed the air. He didn't loom, didn't puff his chest. He simply stood, inevitable as a tide. The first rows straightened without thinking. Dana's grin faltered, then returned, forced. Across the floor, the promotional cage set up for photo ops glittered under a spare rig of lights. It had been background all evening, but now the audience saw it differently. Cameras swiveled, phones pointed. The thought appeared in everyone's mind at once. What if this became real? The mic runner held out the microphone again, hesitant. Chuck looked at it, then past it, his eyes narrowing slightly. The silence wasn't retreat anymore. It was focus. The air tightened, carrying the edge of something dangerous. Everyone knew. When he finally spoke, the words would not be soft. The cage had been background all night, nothing more than a sponsor prop. Polished chain link, fresh canvas, logos glowing under the secondary lights. People had posed for photos beside it, joked about stepping in, and forgotten it. But now, the moment Dana gestured toward it, the cage seemed to harden, its metal edges sharper, its emptiness louder. Dana leaned into his mic, seizing the shift. "You know what?" he said, voice bright, grin wide. "Let's give the people a show. Chuck, why don't you give us 60 seconds in there? 1 minute, just a little demo. No judges, no gloves, nothing crazy. Show us a stance, a kick, a bow. That's all." His hand flicked toward the cage like he was offering a prize. The words struck like a spark. For one heartbeat, the ballroom froze. Then the reaction erupted. Journalists half rose before remembering themselves. Fans who had slipped in cheered like they were ringside. Security stiffened, weighing whether to move. Phones shot up, dozens of little screens framing the cage door. Dana smiled wider, riding the chaos. "Come on, it's harmless, safer than a movie set. 1 minute." The laughter he forced sounded practiced, but people weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Chuck. Standing now, he didn't loom or flex. He was simply upright, steady, jacket falling flat across his shoulders. His face betrayed nothing, no smile, no anger, just stillness. The aisle camera zoomed tight on his eyes, waiting for a blink. It didn't come. A young reporter shouted, "What do you say, sir?" His voice cracked with eagerness. The chant returned, stronger this time. "Chuck! Chuck!" It wasn't wild. It was steady, low, like a drumbeat. Chuck didn't move. His stillness said more than a speech could, but the longer he stood silent, the more the room leaned toward him, hungry for something. Dana sensed it slipping from his control. "Nobody's asking you to fight the roster," he said, chuckling. "It's just movement. Think of it as nostalgia. The fans want it." He dropped the phrase with practiced rhythm. What the people want. 2 security guards drifted toward the cage. A stagehand rolled a cart of gloves to the side. The cage door, propped open earlier for photos, looked suddenly like an invitation. The mic runner crept closer, holding out the wireless as if it might burn. Chuck finally reached for it. Not quick, not dramatic, just a clean lift. The room spiked with noise, then hushed when he didn't speak immediately. He scanned the crowd once, the cameras, the faces, the lit doorway of the cage. When he spoke, the words were plain. 1 minute, he said, is all I need. It wasn't a boast. It sounded like a fact. The room needed a heartbeat to process it, then detonated. People stood. Phones shook in raised hands. Reporters froze, realizing they'd just caught a line that would live far beyond the night. Dana clapped his hands once, loud into the mic. "There it is," he said, his grin stretching thin. "All right, let's do it. 60 seconds. He looked at the floor manager, and that was enough. The floor manager's headset lit up with chatter. Open the cage, lights up, camera low. Chuck returned the mic, set his folded program neatly on the chair, and stepped into the aisle. The chant surged again, deeper, slower, more like a verdict than encouragement. Security, caught between orders and instinct, chose to escort rather than block. The cage door creaked as a volunteer pulled it open wider. The mat smelled faintly of vinyl and disinfectant. A medic drifted closer. A sponsor rep slid discreetly into frame, nudging a logo toward Destiny. Chuck stopped at the threshold, one hand brushing the post. He didn't step inside yet. He tested the metal, let it go, then lifted his chin just slightly. The crowd felt it as a signal. The line between theater and reality had thinned. Behind him, Dana laughed, too high, filling the silence with noise. "Make it quick," he said, playing host to a moment already bigger than him. Chuck's hand left the post, and in that instant, the entire room, every lens, every phone, every breath, leaned forward, waiting to hear whether the next sound would be the slap of his shoe on canvas or something far heavier. The cage door clanged as it swung open, the sound cutting through the hum like a hammer on steel. Chuck stepped forward without ceremony. No gloves, no trunks, no walkout music. Just jeans, boots, and the kind of plain jacket that didn't belong under the arena lights. The crowd immediately caught the contrast. Everything about him said guest, not fighter. And yet here he was, stepping into the center of a stage built to consume men younger, faster, hungrier. Dinah leaned over the mic, his grin sharp as glass. "Let's see if the legend still knows how to move." His tone was playful. But the words were meant to bite. The crowd split down the middle, half roaring approval at the spectacle, half tightening in their seats with unease. Inside the cage, a younger UFC fighter was already waiting. He couldn't have been more than 30, body lean and hard, taped fists twitching with restless energy. The cameras loved him. His skin gleamed under the heat. His eyes glinted with the thrill of being hand-picked for this moment. He shadowboxed exaggeratedly, throwing wide, snappy punches at the empty air, each one meant to pump the crowd. He smiled at the audience, then at Dana, then at Chuck, as if to say, "This is mine." The referee, half bewildered at being roped into theater, raised a hand between them, then let it fall. The signal was loose, improvised, but it was enough. The young fighter didn't wait. He lunged fast, leading with a hook designed less for precision than spectacle. The crowd screamed at the suddenness of it. This wasn't pantomime. It was velocity. Phones jittered as hands struggled to keep the shot steady. Chuck didn't counter. He didn't even look like he moved. He leaned back half an inch, the punch slicing the air in front of his face with nothing to land on. His eyes never left the younger man's shoulders. The crowd gasped, not because the dodge was flashy, but because it wasn't. No flourish, no spin, no wasted effort. Just absence where violence was supposed to be. The fighter reset, circling with a grin, raising his hands to taunt. He threw a jab, then a low kick that slapped against the canvas with a hollow sound. Chuck sidestepped it, barely shifting his weight. Again, nothing extravagant, just the smallest decision at the perfect second. Something inside the arena shifted. The laughter, the chants, the easy amusement, they drained away. Silence crept in, quick and heavy. The audience realized at the same time, this wasn't play. The tempo of the fight had changed, and Chuck wasn't dancing to anyone's rhythm but his own. The younger man tried again, pushing harder this time. He darted forward with another combination, hands snapping out in quick bursts, footwork sharp, loud breaths punctuating each strike. Chuck's feet whispered against the mat as he slid just outside range, every attack cutting air, every miss louder than the strike itself. The cage, which had moments ago seemed like a backdrop for a stunt, now felt like a trap closing. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, necks craning, voices caught in their throats, A woman near the front row grabbed her friend's arm. A man behind her muttered, "Oh my God," into his phone without realizing it was still recording. At the table, Dana kept smiling, but his laugh faltered. He glanced at the monitors, then back at the cage, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm against the wood. His joke was becoming something else, and he could feel it. The fighter, flushed now, bounced on his toes, trying to push energy back into the room. He wagged his hand at Chuck, beckoning him forward, then threw another jab cross, harder, meaner. Chuck ducked under the cross and pivoted an inch to the left, his eyes never leaving the younger man's chest. The crowd's silence deepened. Every missed punch made the cage echo louder. Every small movement from Chuck tightened the grip of anticipation. The arena felt like it was holding its breath. By the time the first minute ticked past, the spectacle Dana had wanted no longer belonged to him. What began as a joke had tipped into something raw, something unstageable. The young fighter's smile was gone. The crowd wasn't laughing. And Chuck Norris, standing steady in plain clothes under the glare of the Octagon, hadn't thrown a single strike. The fight hadn't even started, and already, everyone in the room understood. This was no longer a game. The young fighter's smile burned off like fog under heat. He shook out his arms, rolled his neck, and came forward with purpose now. No more wide, showy swings. His breath changed, shorter and meaner, the hiss of a man who decided to make contact. The crowd felt the switch and tensed as one body, their voices thinning into a jagged hum that made the cage sound bigger, the chain link louder. Chuck didn't advance. He didn't retreat. He settled into a posture that hardly read as a stance at all. Weight light, shoulders down, eyes fixed not on the kid's face, but on the space where intention becomes movement. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not an impact. That calm hurt more than taunts. The kid probed with a level change feint, pawing jab, then a calf kick that thudded against canvas air as Chuck withdrew by inches. The whiff got a few nervous laughs from the cheap seats and a hiss from the writer's row. Cameras tightened. Mics hovered like dragonflies, trying to catch breath. Dana's smile stayed on, but it had lost its anchor. He leaned toward the monitor, then away, then back. Fingers tapping out a restless tempo the house system picked up as a low, sympathetic thump. He wanted this to be a bit. The room wanted proof. The fighter switched stance to southpaw and came in heavier. He layered a right hook to the body as a disguise, then shot a straight left at head height. Clean, fast, decent timing. Chuck tilted and the glove flashed past with nothing to hold. The kid reset, bit down, and doubled it. Chuck's feet murmured across the mat. Nothing more. Something strange happened to the sound of the arena then. It narrowed. 1,000 throats held breath and made the same small whistle, like a kettle threatening to sing. The crowd wasn't hungry for impact anymore. They were hungry for the truth of control. The kid, sweating now, blinked stinging salt from his eyes and came again. Jab, jab, step, left knee, shoulders rising with effort. Chuck's left hand floated halfway out, not to parry, just to mark distance. The knee grazed air. The kid's hip turned for a follow-up elbow, but he didn't throw it. He'd lost the angle and knew it. The knowledge cost him rhythm. On the broadcast cameras, the shot found Dana's face at the exact moment he realized the tempo belonged to someone else. The zinger lines in his head stopped lining up. Concern didn't bloom. It leaked, slow and visible, like light under a door. "Engage!" a voice from somewhere near the floor seats yelled, the way you shout into a dream to make it change. The kid heard it. He obliged. He faked low and ripped high with a right that had bad ideas in it. Chuck's response was to do less. He didn't answer wild with wild or showmanship with volume. He made the moment smaller. He let the kid finish missing. The silence before the next exchange was startling. Everything seemed to pause. The LED ad ring, the gaffer tape corners, the goal of the night. Even the cage door, latched and solid, seemed to wait. The fighter bounced once, twice, found his bounce uneven, forced it level, then leaped forward on a hard entry. He tried to crowd distance, smother the stillness, put his hands on the legend's jacket like that would make the past obey the present. His right foot planted too close to the center line. His shoulders betrayed the shot before his hips owned it. Chuck stepped off that line by half a shoe and, for the first time all evening, let his hand leave neutral. It looked like nothing. It was everything. A short, exact strike. No wind-up, no twist you could teach in a class, no drama to sell a replay. The kind of motion that seems to begin where it ends. Knuckles found a rib gap. A nerve, a hinge in the young man's machinery. Time hiccuped. The kid's face turned blank with surprise before pain knew its name. He folded at the waist and then kept going, skidding to a knee, palms splayed on clean canvas that didn't care how clean his ankles had been 10 seconds ago. The first row stood because their bodies told them the floor had moved. A woman screamed once and covered her mouth with both hands like she'd said something dangerous. A man laughed in a way that sounded like fear. The sound that followed wasn't applause, not at first. It was an exhale detonating. Then the room found its voice. The arena blew. It came in layers. Shouts from the balcony, a waterfall of claps from mid-tier seats, the roar of phones capturing and confirming, the dull gong of 10,000 notifications starting their sprint. The kid tried to stand and didn't. His hands slid. He turned to a hip, breath hitching high, the soft animal sound of a body clarifying a mistake. Chuck didn't follow. He didn't loom or posture. He stepped back half a pace and resettled, hands at his sides, as if the mat were a living room carpet. The restraint hit harder than pursuit. At the table, Dana was already moving. He forgot the mic and shouted off it, the words landing in chunks. "That's it. Okay. Hey, good. Stop." He gestured to a ref who looked around as if hunting for a rule book that had been confiscated. A PR handler sprinted toward the cage with a face that begged time to rewind. Security, who had been statues, became a river. The cameras caught Dana mid-stride, expression split between control and the knowledge that control had left the building 5 minutes earlier. His laugh made a comeback attempt and died without witnesses. He reached the cage panel and rattled it like a man late to his own door. Someone found the latch, and the clang of it opening cut through the ovation like punctuation. A medic slid in on one knee, checking pupils with the quick hands of a person who has learned to make decisions in small rectangles of time. "I'm good," the kid lied, then remembered how breath works and tried again with fewer letters. He wasn't yet, but he would be. Around the arena, narrative hardened at speed. Old writers put pens down mid-sentence and just looked. Younger ones kept typing even though their hands were shaking. A sponsor rep rotated a banner toward the hard camera and hated himself for it. Phones everywhere caught the same angle but with different shakiness. The algorithm would unify them before morning. Chuck took one more step back and the crowd saw something strange in his face. Not triumph. A kind of stern pity. The look of a man who has been on both sides of a lesson and knows which side leaves a mark that matters. Dana pushed in between the lines that hadn't formed, palms out, mouth moving, tone stuffed with levity as if he could turn the scene back into bit-part comedy. He pointed at his own smile like it was a prop. The prop didn't work. The cage had a new temperature now. People felt it in their throats. The Octagon wasn't a stage anymore. It was a room that remembers. The kid rolled to his knees. He made it to his feet with the medic's hand ghosting near his elbow, not touching unless needed. He looked at Chuck and then away, then back again. Contrition trying on his features and deciding whether to stay. The crowd's roar modulated, less feral, more astonished. 1,000 brains recalibrating at once. 2 teenagers held their phones high and didn't speak. A man with a press badge he'd worn for 20 years blinked slow and nodded, once, as if filing the moment where memories keep their sharp edges. Dana had the mic again. and the room could see him reaching for an exit line that might spare ego and lawsuit in equal measure. "All right, okay, fun little demonstration, folks," he said, too bright. "Let's keep it friendly, yeah? Legend still moves, huh?" The words clinked against the chain link and fell. The cameras kept splitting duties. One tight on Chuck's face, one on the kid's breath, one on Dana's managerial smile slipping frame by frame. In the control truck, someone whispered, "Don't cut, this is the thing," and a person who had never been in charge nodded as if they were. The kid drew a breath that didn't shiver and lifted his chin. The crowd rewarded the courage of standing by not calling it something smaller. He took a step toward Chuck, and Chuck, stillness returning as if on cue, shifted his weight, as if to meet him, not to finish anything, but to decide what this would be. The noise eased again, instant and obedient. Even the LEDs seemed to dim at the edges. People leaned forward in their seats and on their phones and in their lives far away, held by the same question: what does a man do after he proves the point? The young fighter steadied himself, swaying on his feet, breath thin but holding. His eyes flicked toward the medic, then toward Dana, then back to Chuck. The choice was simple but heavy. Fold the moment or meet it. He stepped forward. Chuck didn't posture. He didn't prepare another strike. He moved aside, creating space, and extended a hand. The gesture was quiet but absolute. It carried more force than the punch had. The kid hesitated, pride wrestling with exhaustion, then accepted. Chuck's grip was firm but not crushing, pulling him upright with a smoothness that stripped away humiliation. It wasn't dominance, it was restoration. The arena reacted with confusion that turned into awe. Half the crowd had come for spectacle, hoping for either blood or comedy. They got neither. Instead, they witnessed something rarer: control paired with mercy. Some erupted in cheers, others stayed silent, filming without commentary, their silence amplifying the meaning. Dana climbed through the cage door, scrambling to recover his footing. He wore the grin of a man trying to reframe chaos as comedy. "Well," he said, voice booming, "guess the legend still got a little gas in the tank." He slapped the fighter's shoulder, clapped once, turned to the audience with palms wide. All in good fun, right? But nobody was laughing. Phones didn't follow his gestures. All eyes were locked on Chuck, standing in plain clothes, calm as stone. Chuck asked for a microphone with nothing more than a glance. A stagehand, as if compelled, placed one in his hand. He lifted it only halfway, not rushing, letting the room quiet itself. When he spoke, it wasn't loud. "Respect," he said, voice steady, eyes sweeping the arena, "is earned, not demanded." The words landed without theatrics. No speech, no gloating, just truth, dropped into silence like a pebble in water. Ripples spread instantly. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in something deeper. Applause rolled like thunder. Whistles tangled with claps until the arena became one voice. The young fighter bowed slightly, ashamed but relieved. He mouthed, "Thank you." Chuck answered with the smallest nod, enough to acknowledge the courage it took to stand. Dana tried again. He raised the mic, forcing laughter. "Folks, that's what happens when you bring Hollywood into the Octagon." His chuckle rang false. Nobody echoed it. For the first time that night, he looked like a man who understood he'd lost. Not a fight, but the room. The ovation stretched into minutes. People stood. Strangers clasped each other's shoulders. Phones shook as hands filmed history. Old journalists didn't lift pens. They knew words would fail. The cameras caught everything, the fighter steadying himself, the promoter shrinking in his own spotlight, and Chuck, motionless, unadorned, radiating the kind of authority that can't be staged. The roar refused to fade. Each time it dipped, another wave began, until even the rafters pulsed with it. The crowd wasn't celebrating a knockout. They were saluting something heavier, the reminder that skill without respect is nothing, and respect without proof is hollow. As the sound rolled on, the final image formed. Dana, grin slipping, the young fighter humbled but intact, and Chuck Norris, standing calm, his words already carved into memory. This was no exhibition. It was a lesson, and everyone in the arena knew they had witnessed a scene that would be retold until it no longer needed telling.